I can think about a very long introduction about the next speaker. Marketing manager, she will explain what it actually means. Bibianne Roetert, well, I think if your company is mentioned already in all presentations so far, I don't think it needs a further introduction. So, Bibianne, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Lucas, and thank you so much for having me amongst these amazing marketing gurus like Trix, like Jenny, like Yuri. So thanks for having me. Yeah, so today I'd like to take you on board of the mission of Tony's Chocolonely to make 100% slave-free chocolate the norm. And I would like to show how we change the cocoa industry bar by bar. But first, let me start with introducing myself. So I'm Bibianne Roetert, and I'm officially called Princess Creatrix, because at Tony's you don't get a normal job title, you actually get a funny job title, and mine is Princess Creatrix. But you could actually also know me as the marketing manager of the Benelux and Beyond. And today, I'd like to bring you on board of our impact company, because we're an impact company that makes chocolate and not the other way around. And it all started with this, the unequally divided cocoa industry, here represented in the unequally divided bar. This unequally divided cocoa industry is actually represented by millions of farmers harvesting cocoa on one side, millions of consumers enjoying cocoa on the other side, and only 5 parties who control the cocoa trade in the middle. These 5 parties are huge, and they're actually gaining lots of profits over the backs of the farmers where the cocoa is harvested. So it means that the value which is created at consumer side does not end up equally at the cocoa farmer side. And where are these cocoa farmers then? Well, the cocoa farmers are mostly in West Africa, and these 5 countries here represented in our bar. You might know it, you didn't know it yet, but this is actually a small gimmick in our bar. It's the west coast of Africa represented. And in these countries, there are actually 2 countries which are representing 60% of delivering all cocoa worldwide. And those 2 markets are Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana. And in these 2 countries, there are 2.5 million farms. And on these farms, there are over 1.5 million children working. And 95% of them is working under illegal circumstances. So that means that they're working with sharp machetes, heavy bags, which disform their bodies, and all in order to harvest cocoa in a cheap possible way. And there are 30,000 people, victims of modern slavery, reported at the harvest of cocoa. And that's not an issue which has just happened recently. It's an issue which has been there for decades already. And back in 2005, there was the Keuringsdienst van Waarde, you might know it. It's the Dutch version of the Food CIA, with Teun van de Keuken, who's the presenter of Keuringsdienst van Waarde. He went to the cocoa farms to see whether there was still illegal child labor in cocoa at that time. And he found still cases of modern slavery and illegal child labor. And he was furious because he didn't understand that people didn't know about these horrible things happening behind the scenes while they were eating lovely chocolate. So he wanted to raise awareness by this. And the first thing he did was actually handing himself in at the police, where he said, well, I'm actually being complicit in modern slavery when I buy a chocolate bar. So please hand me over to the judge. But actually, the judge couldn't convict him because the cocoa in the chocolate bar wasn't 100% traceable back to the farm where the modern slavery was found. So actually, the lack of traceability made that he was set free. But it didn't stop him, because he wanted to raise awareness for this topic, which he found so important. And therefore, he became part of the problem, and therefore wanted to be part of the solution by making his own chocolate bar. He called it Tony's Chocolonely, after himself, Tony, and his lonely fight in the chocolate industry. And it's a red bar because red is the color of warning, warning that there's something wrong in the chocolate industry. And with the birth of the very first bar, also the mission of Tony's Chocolonely was born, that together we make 100% slave-free the norm in chocolate. And that makes Tony Chocolonely not a typical company. It makes us an impact company that makes chocolate and not the other way around. And it makes that our marketing only exists to achieve our mission. And it's not a gimmick to have a mission to grow your business. No, it's really that we want to achieve that mission in order to eradicate child labor and modern slavery. But what is it that Tony's does different than other companies? Because, of course, we talk a lot about it, but we don't show a lot about the background. And you could say that what differs us from other companies is that we really invested a lot of time and still invest in understanding the issues in our industry, of which 3 are the biggest, and that's a very low average living income, child labor, which I just explained, and deforestation. Those 3 issues are the biggest in the cocoa industry, and that really asks for a solution. And it doesn't only require that you invest time to understand your issues, it also invests time in the solutions. And therefore we found 5 sourcing principles which actually have to work in combination with each other, and we spend about 6.2% of all our revenue in this 5 sourcing model. But we could do our utmost best to change our supply chain, but we have to get others on board of our mission in order to change all chocolate worldwide. Because in the end, we want to change 100% of chocolate. And therefore, we said only together we could make all chocolate 100% slave-free. So only together, working with politicians, working with retailers, with consumers, as we call them, choco fans, everybody has to join on our mission in order to make a change. And that requires to get people on board of our mission. So how do you do that? Well, we've actually developed a roadmap with 3 steps, which makes it easier for us to bring people on board of our mission. And I believe these 3 steps are actually steps that any company could take to bring someone or more people on board of what you're trying to achieve. So it starts with increasing awareness of your issue that you have, because if you don't know what the issue is, you don't know how you could solve it, right? The second is actually giving the right example and how you could solve it. And the third is inspire others to act too. Inspire others to follow you on the mission and actually make a change themselves too. So let me first start with how we try to increase awareness. Well, our story is quite complex. It's about modern slavery, it's about deforestation. There are so many topics that it's very hard to combine everything in one billboard or in a 10-second TV ad. And therefore, we invest a lot of time in actually doing this, what I try to do now with you, and explaining the full story, building true relationships with people, and having the time to explain what we do. But of course, we want to reach everyone, and therefore we also build relationships with press and with influencers in order for them to tell our story in a more detailed way via press, newspapers, and other media channels. But in the end, we know from research that it's not our mission the reason why people buy us. It's actually great taste, and it's about attractive flavors. And this is not something that we knew already. Like back in the days, Henk Jan, our former chief chocolate, he was actually against doing research. So he said, he was more in the mind of Henry Ford. He said, if I've asked people what they want, they would have said faster horses. So therefore, he said, I don't want to do research, I just want to do the right thing. And if I do the right thing, I believe that people would follow me. But the bigger the brand became, the more urge we got to get insights behind why it was working. And then we found that was indeed that great taste, attractive flavors, and mission on the 3rd place. So with those stats in mind, we actually integrate them in the following campaigns. And this was actually one of the big campaigns which came out of that, the Sweet Solution campaigns, where we launched great tasting, attractive flavors with a bold message. So this is our campaign where we invited the big chocolate companies to join us in our way of sourcing by copying them by the way they look, the way they taste, and therefore proving that you could actually make tasty chocolate but sourced in a good way. Then giving the right example, we could, of course, raise awareness, but of course, we also have to show how you could solve it. And that's what we do with the 5 sourcing principles. So that's about 100% traceable cocoa beans, where the industry average is actually 60%. We work together for at least 5 years, so not 1 year, but for the long term. We support farmers to actually stand stronger together in corporations and invest in focusing on quality and productivity. But we know that poverty is actually one of the main drivers of all the issues in cocoa. So therefore, the 5th pillar, paying a higher price, is a very important one. But what is a good price? So together with Fairtrade, we calculated the living income reference price. And this living income reference price is what a farmer should earn per kilo of cocoa in order to make a living. This price is made up out of the average household size, the cost of farming, cost of living, and that all ended up into one price that a farmer should earn. Here you see how it works in reality. It's a stat from Côte d'Ivoire. And on the left side, you see the full block, which is actually the living income reference price of last year. And the block on the right is actually the living income reference price of this year. You see that it increased due to inflation, which makes sense. Everything gets more expensive. However, the red part is the farm gate price, and that price is set by the government, and it's actually the price for cocoa in the market. And that decreased, even though there was inflation. But because we said we want to pay that higher price, we want to pay that living income reference price, we, as Tony's, we closed that gap by paying the Fairtrade premium, which all Fairtrade brands pay, which is actually the green part, but we also pay the Tony's premium, the blue part, and the co-op fee, the orange part, in order for farmers to make a living. But you could make impact, and you could do all the best things, like Jenny says, but you can't make a horrible product. You actually have to make something which tastes good. And here you see our caramel sea salt bar, which actually made us the 2nd biggest chocolate brand of the Netherlands. And this bar was the best sold bar actually in the Netherlands. Which proves that you could make impact whilst being commercially successful too. And then we have to inspire others to act, which is super important because together we achieve our mission. And therefore we don't do everything differently in communication. We also do differently in supply chain management, for example, as we share our way of working in the Tony's Open Chain. We've developed a platform which enables other brands to buy their cocoa via our 5 sourcing principles, where Albert Heijn, with their private label Delicata, was actually the very first mission ally. It was 4 years ago where we started, and by now we have much more mission allies, and recently Ben & Jerry's joined. So that means that also Ben & Jerry's pays almost 80% extra for the cocoa beans, which are 100% traceable. And that has brought us to actually making a change. Those 4 years of open chain now gives us sort of the stat that the average income has risen to $2.04, and that the child labor rate has dropped to below 5%, and that deforestation even dropped to 0% due to 100% GPS mapping. But we know that in the end, consumers buy us because of our great taste and the attractive flavors. But what would have happened if we'd only focused on those and just left out the mission? Well, we know what happened, because actually we have the industry numbers. And the industry numbers show what the reality could have been. And that's actually that the average income would be 78 cents per person. And that the child labor rate would be 46%. That means that actually 1 on 2 children works in the 2 countries. And that the deforestation rate would be 70% instead of 0. So I'm super happy and proud of the fact that Tony's did go the extra mile and did their utmost best to actually achieve that mission, because that has enabled that fact that the average income has risen, that the child labor rate has dropped, and that deforestation actually dropped to 0. But we're not done. We still try to get everyone on board of our mission and try to change the system of cocoa, because only together we could make 100% slave-free chocolate the norm. And I'd like to challenge you as well at home, because in the end, everybody works at a company and thinks, well, you could only make a change if you're working at Tony's Chocolonely. Well, that's not completely true. I think everyone could make a change. Even if you work at a big company, like the bigger the company, the bigger the impact you could potentially make. The only thing you have to do is just start, and you could start really small by just understanding the challenges and the possible solutions within your own industry and within your own circle of influence. And then define a mission for yourself or your brand, regardless of research. And in order to achieve that in a sustainable way, integrate it in your business model, because only then you could achieve it in the long run. And don't expect that it will be perfect from the first moment. No, you will fail, but you have to get up again and continue to adapt, because only then you could achieve your mission on the long run. And most important, just have fun and make it fun so others would like to join you on your mission in order to reach it. So, thank you for your attention, and let's make impact organization the norm.
Well, thank you, Bibiane. Really nice to hear the full story, of course. We heard parts of it, but hearing the full story is really challenging, it's really inspiring. And one of the questions that comes from the audience is, what is Tony Chocolonely's vision on fair trade labels?
I'm Bibiane, so I'm not Tony Chocolonely, so that's always a good disclaimer. We work together with Fairtrade, so we've developed the Living Income Reference Prize together with Fairtrade, and therefore, yeah, I think it's a great first step for brands to become Fairtrade certified. Fairtrade is very big, so with scale, there's always more challenges. So I believe the industry, all industries need more front runners, and fair trade as a sort of the backbone, which should be sort of the norm.
Okay. Hey, and if there are any other questions, let us know. I have a personal question as well.
Yeah.
So listening to your story and of course mentioning research, or maybe sometimes the challenges of research, I think it's also related to the interpretation of research. But you showed that your research showed that taste and quality are very important drivers for buying Tony Chocolonely. How do you actually make sure that, how do you look at quality? Because also if you hear the story from Jenny, she mentioned also the innovative approach, changing a lot of standards in the industry. How do you do that? How does that process go? How do you come up with a new taste and then it also tastes that good?
Yeah, I think, as I already mentioned also in the beginning, we try to do everything a bit differently. So also when it comes down to our product, we're quite strict when it comes down to how our packaging looks. We're quite strict on how our bar looks. It's thick and it's unequally divided. We get a lot of consumer complaints actually about, ooh, it's so unhandy that it's unequally divided. But we just stick to the unequally divided pieces because we're super stubborn. And I think that stubbornness combined with an eagerness to understand new trends and new flavors. For example, we just go to restaurants or to other places out of home to taste new flavors. And there we get inspired and bring that back to our bars.
Okay. Hey, there's also another question. There are a lot of marketers, marketing professionals listening to this event or participating in this event. And what advice would you give them? What recommendation would you give to other marketers that want to drive a CSR agenda? What should they do? How should they make that important?
Yeah, I think there are two things. Just stick to your own behavior. So if you want to make a difference or a sustainable difference, try to make every choice you make in your role as sustainable as possible, even when that means that you have to challenge the status quo. So always ask that question so people start to understand that that is what drives you. And when you are already there in that phase, because I think that's the first step, and then the second step is to understand the brand or the product that you work for, where is the negative impact coming from? So you could do a CO2 analysis where you see, okay, this is actually the part where the biggest CO2 emissions come from, and focus on tackling that first. It's really important to do it step by step and don't want to change everything all at once, but try to make baby steps into one focus area, and then eventually you could get there.
Okay, yeah, I try to sometimes. There are other questions coming in. So one of the questions that also comes in is, what do you have? So you have this mission of making, of realizing a certain target. What do you do if other companies do the same? So have the same things. How do you then maintain your position, or is that not relevant anymore?
Well, I think if others would copy us, like if all the big chocolate companies would copy us, we would go out of business and we would have achieved our mission, and that would be great. So yeah, I would find it amazing if that would happen.
So there is an end date.
There is an end date, yes, but until today we have only 0.5% of all cocoa beans sourced via Tony's Open Chain. So that means we have 99.5% more cocoa beans to source via that way of working. And hopefully 1 or 2 big chocolate companies will actually join us in paying a higher price and having 100% traceable beans.
Yeah, and besides, so the route you're now taking is the route via the consumer. Do you also, besides that route, how do you involve the other bigger companies in that mission?
Yeah. So we play different roles in different parts. So of course, we have a role towards the consumer, but we also we talk a lot to politicians, and we try to influence lawmaking. For example, the due diligence law, which is recently a lot in the news. But also sitting around the table with the big chocolate companies in DISCO, the Dutch, Initiative Sustainable Cocoa, where we discuss how we could actually make steps together and learn from each other.
Okay. Well, thanks. And again, thanks a lot. I think that your story just proves why you're mentioned by the previous speakers. So thanks for sharing that and for your enthusiasm about the company. This is also the last presentation, or this was the last presentation of the day, which means that our brand growth event comes to an end. And for me, I took out a couple of lessons. And before you all go, I would like to share my most important lessons that I've learned from listening to all the speakers today. And the first thing that I learned is that CSR is very important. It's not per se an ingredient for growth. It's just like marketing. It's like, hey, you do it for a certain reason, and if growth comes from it, then that's fine, but it starts somewhere else. I also think that what the presentation showed me is that CSR strategy doesn't have to be big. And one of the reasons why there was not a CSR strategy, as Jori explained, is because a lot of companies said, yeah, we're too small for it. Or the CEO has not decided yet, or the owner of the company has not decided yet. We wait for that. And I think that in the different presentations, also in the final words from Bibiane, but also in the story from Trix, they both mentioned, make the questions smaller. And look at your own environment, look at your own responsibility, and try to act within that responsibility, and try to be honest to yourself and really try to do something. So I think that besides this company strategy, besides the strategy or beside the big strategy that is behind something, look at what your role is and how you can influence that. And finally, I think, and that's for me as being an owner, CSR comes from a reason. You want to do good, you want to make a difference, change something, and that's mostly led by a certain frustration or something that you see, a certain dilemma, and that's the starting point. And then, based upon that, the rest comes automatically. The rest comes by itself, but if you have that strong opinion, the reason for change or the reason for doing things differently, that is leading, and that should be leading in all forms of strategy. So basically, it also shows what Jori shows, corporate social responsibility is not something that you see as part of marketing, it actually is marketing. And it starts with letting everyone in the company know what your values are, the reasons why you do things, and then the rest comes by itself. I think that it's fantastic that you all joined in order to understand what you thought about today. I hope you all fill in the evaluation that we will share after this event, or even as part of the chat already. But for us, it's really important to let us know what you thought about this, how we can do it better next year, maybe suggestions for a next ingredient for growth. And I hope to see all of you next year or even sooner. And thank you all for listening, and thank you all for your attendance.